The Super Bowl was a contest between the Seahawks and the Patriots, but the real debate is about Kid Rock versus Bad Bunny. We're going to have a spirited debate about that question right now. So, of course, the Super Bowl was this weekend, and I am dialing in from the victorious Pacific Northwest. Can't say I watched the game. Can't say I've watched any Seahawks games in the past 10 years, but I'm still feeling the vicarious thrill of victory.
Yes.
That is just redounding through my neighborhood. Yeah.
And that victory is the Kid Rock performance at halftime, of course, is what you're referring to here. Who cares about the game? This is about the halftime music show. Okay, this is the most important thing for any of us to be talking about right now. What did you make? Well, I know what you made of the halftime show, Chris. You tweeted about it. So do you want to recapitulate for our audience here your controversial take on the...
Yeah, my controversial take, as always, is a completely rational and reasonable and enlightened take that will just take time to trickle down into the brains of the masses, but I'm confident it will. So, look, I did watch the halftime show. I did watch the alternative halftime show, which was produced by Turning Point USA, that featured Kid Rock. And so my general point is that conservatives have been placed in such a position of subordination in the culture that they play the same cycle year after year. Every year, there's going to be a mainstream Super Bowl act, and then you're going to get the predictable conservative criticism that it's degeneracy, it's anti-American, it's left-wing, it's woke.
All true.
Most of which is true. And then this year, the big idea was, well, we need an alternative program. And all of the great minds put their heads together, and then the boardroom of Mad Men style conservative luminaries said, what we really need is Kid Rock reprising his 1999 Capo Lavoro Ba Witta Ba. And to add a modern twist, we're going to put him in jean shorts and tennis shoes.
Okay.
And then they claimed victory. Like they said, absolute critical culture war victory. I'm skeptical. My skepticism might be edging through.
I can on, the other side here, I can smell the disdain. Okay. I can smell the contempt coming off of you for this response. Okay. Now let's go through this piece by piece, because I think you're wrong. Okay. I think you're wrong, like mostly wrong, if not altogether wrong. There are things you're getting right here, but I think it's a question of emphasis and what actually is happening, what actually we saw happen on Sunday. We have seen in the past this usual cycle of the Super Bowl happens, they announce the halftime show, conservatives get upset, we complain about the ads, we complain about the various aspects of the pageantry around the Super Bowl, that these are promoting sort of offensive cultural trends and so on and so forth. The game happens. We all watch it. We all then spend the following week talking about it and bringing more attention to the advertisers whose whole raison d'etre here is to get attention from us, good or bad. We then give them exactly what we want. We tuck our tail between our legs and we go home, and then we do the same thing the next year. Okay, we are, who plays the Savannah Bananas. Okay, we're on the other side of that. Okay, whoever's losing every game to the Savannah Bananas, that's us. But we have to remember, one, the other side is the Savannah Bananas. It's not the Yankees. Okay, this is an important point. Like that. The thing they did was also not like real, important, significant cultural production. It's also kind of kitschy and lame and banal and kind of stale and expected in its own way, despite what they say about it. And then the other thing I want to point out here is, no, actually conservatives did something different this time. They actually did something about it, okay? Now, you might not like the specific things they did, but rather than just complain, actually, they put together a tremendously complex sort of logistical counter-programming that, according to these numbers we saw, how real they are, I don't know, but I think some of these numbers are real. Something like 6 million people tuned in to the halftime report. I'm going to open this thing here because it said something like 26.5 million people watched the Bad Bunny halftime show. That's down from 40% of who watched the halftime show last time. Now, it was a kind of bad game. It just had less interest, generally speaking.
But let's stop there, though, because you're already falling prey to the enormous cope and straight disinformation that has created an insulated, separate reality bubble. The numbers that you're citing are from some online company no one's ever heard of. And even the math itself, the headline on Twitter for conservatives was 49% year-over-year decline in audience.
Yeah.
But even the numbers, if you go to the raw data from this company, which I don't think should be trusted as an A-list source, it's something like 10%. But if you go to the Nielsen ratings, which have been doing this forever, it's the gold standard. You can have year-over-year comparisons dating back decades. In fact, this was the largest single halftime show audience in history. Maybe not as a percentage of population, but it was even a year-over-year increase from last year. So the conservative idea is we're going to take 10 or 20% of the audience, and then they're going to have to listen to us. Again, is pure fantasy, pure fiction.
Hold on, though. I want to point a clarification here. Maybe you don't have it in front of you, but my suspicion is those numbers they're citing are international audience numbers. Is that right?
No, I think these are kind of total audience numbers from Nielsen, which would be almost exclusively weighted domestically. And again, so kind of apples to apples comparisons, you had something like 135 million people watching the halftime show, which is a lot of people. And I guess the statistics I think are again this kind of fictional statistical universe to make conservatives feel good, but they're not related to the underlying reality, which ultimately is bad for us. I will concede the point to you though that yes, doing something is good. They had a really big achievement, getting viewership, pulling off an event, getting some buzz, and getting some talk about it. But even from a structural point of view, the basic thing is you have to always figure out what game do you want to be playing, and are you playing a game that you could ultimately win? Ultimately, here, I don't think that there's an avenue for victory. You're always going to be, 1/20th, 1/30th, 1/40th of the audience. You're going to have a kind of a quick drop off year over year if this is a trend that continues, and ultimately you're going to be like the very far second place. And so I just think structurally, like, do you really want to be the well, they have the big show with 135 million people, but we have Kid Rock. Again, I think that ultimately there's no real path to victory. And a lot of the winning, the noise about winning that we heard the last couple days, is ultimately evanescent. It's ultimately part of a broader fantasy, which makes conservatives less effective in the long term.
Okay, I have like a lot to say about this because again, I think you're right partially, but I think you're focused on too much on the content rather than the form. This is proof of concept. You're demonstrating the ability to pull off something independent. You're not asking for inclusion in the thing. I mean, what looks weak year over year is that conservatives just merely want to be a junior partner in what the prevailing monoculture is otherwise doing. And they want some kind of validation or something from the New York Times or from the NFL. We see you exist, okay? And we're going to put, therefore, some like conservative country act in our halftime show to appease you. This is trying something different. And look, I wonder what the long-term success of this might be. I wonder what this leads to. I wonder if there's a second, third year where this grows and becomes something else that can actually compete in some way at scale. And now we have to ask here, like, okay, well, I want to say one thing. I like Kid Rock, okay? Does that make me a chud? One thing that occurred to me. No. Yeah. You're wrong about this. Kid Rock's good. Okay, Kid Rock can actually sing.
Is not good.
Kid Rock can sing. You're wrong about that. That song you did with Sheryl Crow, great. great song. Okay, the guy can actually sing. He's really talented, and I would honestly say this. I'm being like unironic here. Kid Rock's good, but also he's not like, certainly not somehow a lesser artist than Bad Bunny. Okay.
Well, let's go straight for it.
We are much too harsh because we're like we walk around with this like embarrassment over our own cultural production, and there's so much status anxiety like coming off conservatives, and like I feel this too, but you know, the left, like they're always celebrating their mediocrities in the same way they would celebrate anything else, and we don't have that skill. We don't have the willingness to just accept that, yeah, Kid Rock's fine, man. There's nothing wrong with Kid Rock. We can have Kid Rock. A Kid Rock halftime show is okay. And so, okay, there's that. I also want to just, yeah, go ahead.
Well, hold on though. I'll find myself in the position of defending Bad Bunny. So, look, man, like Kid Rock again. I mean, had a big hit while you and I were both in high school. So it's already off the bat a nostalgia act. Like the height of his kind of vitality, his rock and roll lifestyle, his in your face persona, mixing country and metal and rap, was groundbreaking, innovative, interesting, top of the charts, MTV in 1999. But like that is the best, but now he's like an act that gets passed around conservative circles. And even the HBO show Silicon Valley had this great little vignette where one of the companies is desperate to get a concert put together. They get Kid Rock. It actually has the same background that Turning Point USA used in his concert. And then the joke is that Kid Rock is on stage trying to get everybody amped up. And it's a dead crowd, and they just like maybe one guy clapping.
Don't you wanna go down? Woo! Yeah! Somebody make some mother noise in here! These people.
And so even in pop culture, in let's say a higher brow sense, like HBO has a lock on premium television, symbolically. Kid Rock was already a punchline years ago. And so I will dispute it. And then I would also take the side on looking at the Super Bowl performance from Bad Bunny. Okay, take whatever, like, yeah, it's not Mozart. It's not the Beatles even. It's not even great pop. It's not Jimi Hendrix. It's not counterculture. But if you look at the aesthetic sophistication that was deployed by Bad Bunny, the NFL, it was a visually rich experience. It had kind of subtly woven in themes. The politics were not my politics, but you have to recognize the game that was being played, and you have to admit that even the camera angles, the sets, the extras, the sugarcane, the historical narrative, the actual, the Ricky Martin, nostalgia, you got Ricky Martin. Beautifully done, rich aesthetic experience. The politics were woven in subtly, but successfully.
Okay, so what you're describing, though, has nothing to do with either Bad Bunny or Kid Rock. We're talking about this massive cultural infrastructure that supports the individual artist, who at the end of all this is just the sort of symbol and the final kind of expression of that larger infrastructure. Perhaps in the same way, like the running back scoring the touchdown, he gets all the attention, and his face is in the newspaper the next day, and he's the guy who gets to hold up the trophy. But it's like the offensive lineman, and it's the support staff, and it's all of these like position coaches on the sideline, and it's the quants up in the booth who are running all the numbers, doing the probability calculus for what play to run in this circumstance versus this other circumstance. And what we're seeing, the reason you like what you're accurately describing as the immense kind of infrastructure surrounding the Bad Bunny performance, and why it's engaging and compelling as an artistic product, as an entertainment product, is because of all of that infrastructure. And if Kid Rock, and I say this with all sincerity, had that same kind of surrounding infrastructure with the choreographers and the makeup and design people and the lights and the cameras, as you say, and you had the field and you had the resources to sort of put this all together to construct all this, Kid Rock could be a vehicle for a similar kind of, or an equally compelling artistic expression. You shake your head no, but we actually don't have the counterfactual. And the whole problem of conservative art, and this was the other controversial piece of your tweet that I'll bring up now that you sort of elided in that earlier description, was this idea that your thought had previously been that there's this missing talent, okay, in the right-wing ecosystem. And it's just a matter of finding the right people. It's finding them. We just got to go find them. And we're going to do that through money. We're going to find the right prizes or whatever else to draw them out from, this milieu in which they're languishing sort of undiscovered. And then you said, no, actually, I'm revising my view of this. Maybe they're just not there. Maybe it's just a bunch of Kid Rocks, okay, which, you didn't say that. But I think that's wrong. I think it's wrong. What's missing is the cultural infrastructure. And that you don't just produce that overnight. I mean, this is a massive, massive decades-long undertaking. Okay, go ahead.
That's true, but I'll go back and I'll actually make the opposite argument on Bad Bunny versus Kid Rock. I think that the infrastructure is actually the mirror or parallel with the talent. And I think, look, Bad Bunny is the #1 streaming musical artist in the world. Kid Rock was the #1 streaming artist. Well, maybe not streaming. I mean, he was selling discs at Tower Records or whatever in '99. And so they have the hottest musical act. That's significant. But it's not just numbers. It's not just listenership or audience. But even if you look at it visually as a matter of performance, there's a difference between Bad Bunny, who's young, he's handsome, he exudes vitality. He's bringing, certainly like high sexual imagery onto the screen. That was a huge part of his performance. And then Kid Rock is a nostalgia act. He's much older. He doesn't move as well. He doesn't sing as well as he once did. And I don't think that you would say that Kid Rock brings a youthful kind of vitality or
that's true.
Sexual, kind of high sexual symbolism onto the stage. And so again, you have, I think, the perfect representation, the infrastructure, and then if we think of the artist as kind of dancing on the superstructure, in fact, we're not different. And I think the idea that if Kid Rock had a large stage, that somehow he would have had a similarly sophisticated or aesthetically compelling performance is not true.
No, that's not quite the argument. The argument is that we don't have the capacity to produce the kinds of theatrical pageantry, this sort of the larger element within which. And okay, I'm going to grant
also
you this
true.
For the sake of this conversation, though I don't believe it. Okay, I disavow. But also, a talent like Bad Bunny could actually sort of reach the heights of his potentials, artistic potentials, can only exist by being surrounded with this like larger infrastructure of other talented people. And the right does not have that. And now, okay, Kid Rock, maybe not the perfect example here, but there are others, but they don't want to do it. If you're the actual, okay, and this is where we get into the problem of selection and self-selection and self-out selection. If I am the super talented guy who might have right-leaning inclinations, I want only to express myself in an environment that can best represent all that I'm capable of. And without that larger infrastructure, I don't want to participate in it. It makes me look diminished, degraded. It's sort of ghettoizing. It's ghettoizing. Okay, we talked about this
Which was
last
my
week.
argument, yeah.
Yes, but that's not an effect. That does not necessarily preclude the idea that there are right-wing, super talented people. And the thing is, I know they exist, okay? I'm trying not to Okay, I get DMs
like,
from people all the time who are like very established household names who are very much sympathetic to a lot of these ideas, but they cannot participate. And I'm sure you do too.
That's fair.
They cannot participate on this side of the aisle because they know that then they will lose access to the choreographers and the makeup people and the camera people and the people who, you know, build the sets and the sound people and everything else. And there just isn't a full in the distribution. Here's another example of this. Okay, these are like acclaimed award-winning filmmakers. These are musicians that you all have heard of. These are writers that you all have heard of. Okay, they are there. They are there. But by participating in an explicit conservative thing, they know that that is ghettoizing because they know, and this is the other thing we talked about last week, that the left still has the power to punish in a way that the right doesn't. Okay, they have the power to punish in the way that the right doesn't, so that they don't participate in this stuff. But they would if they could. They would if they knew that they would be protected and would have the ability to draft off, you know, the offensive linemen and the other peripheral players that you need in order to score a touchdown, okay, to keep I
totally agree. But I actually think that you're illustrating the fundamental point that I'm trying to make, which is that this halftime show does not threaten that dynamic. In fact, it reinforces that dynamic because Kid Rock is a MAGA act. He performs at all the MAGA events. He performs at all the GOP conventions. He's, you know, I think he was like probably doing like Trump's like New Year's party, whatever. So he is a MAGA act. And then the signal that you're sending is if you come over to this side, you're now MAGA. And then they were able to get some other big acts. I like Lee Bryce. I like some of the other country acts. But that is a kind of limited phenomenon because the base of power in country music is, of course, Nashville, Tennessee. And then the audience for country music is a much more conservative audience relative to any other musical genre. And so what you're doing is you're actually reinforcing it. And I think by creating an antagonistic relationship, drafting off of the Super Bowl's energy and trying to harvest some, you're still always putting yourself in a subordinate position. You're designing a game that you can't win. And by having, you know, Kid Rock illustrates the point is that, you know, the artists that they look, and the TPUSA guys are amazing. They did better than anybody else could have done. The execution, I think, was very strong. And so it's not a dig on them at all. I mean, no one could have done it better. Nobody. But the structural problem you're identifying is actually, in my view, stronger now than it was last week. And look, it's like, you know, okay, you go down the list from Kid Rock, like who's next? And that list starts to look rough pretty quick. If you're enjoying this episode of Rufo and Lomez, make sure to sign up for the full Blaze TV platform. Great hosts, great shows, great analysis of the news. You can sign up now at blazetv.com/Rufo and Lomez and get $20 off. That's blazetv.com/Rufo and Lomez.
It's a thin roster. I don't disagree with that. I want to point out two things here, though, and I mean this as a provocation, okay? I don't, you know, take this in the spirit it's intended. You sound like, to me, Curtis Yarvin talking to you about what you're doing in higher ed. I mean that seriously, okay? Which is...
That's fair, yeah.
Okay, by trying to create some kind of substitute architecture and working with a, you know, thin roster of personnel and under highly constrained circumstances without nearly the kind of funding and like baseline support you need to pull off a project of this magnitude, you end up reinforcing the very asymmetrical power dynamics that you're intending to vitiate through this activity, through this parallel programming. You, in fact, end up demonstrating your own weakness. Okay, that's point one. And I would say to both, you know, Curtis Yarvin and now to you in response to the Super Bowl thing. The other sporting event I was watching this weekend was the Winter Olympics.
No, because
okay, go ahead.
It's a good point, and I think superficially it's a very provocative and very strong point. But there's one key difference, and the key difference I think is categorical, which is politics and culture are not the same. Conservatives can win to the extent that they can engage in politics. Conservatives have not demonstrated a similar ability to win when they engage in culture. And so the kind of the playing the game that you can win, for as conservatives survey the field broadly, I actually think that they should spend relatively less time on culture and more time on politics, because conservatives cannot dictate the terms of the Super Bowl Act, right, thus far, but conservatives can dictate who wins the presidency of the United States, which is an even bigger payoff than, let's say, the kind of control over the NFL, halftime show. And so the comparison is, and again, there's some of the dynamic that would play. I would concede that. There's some of that dynamic at play, certainly. Curtis's critique is not baseless. But I think in this case, we cannot confuse politics and culture. And in fact, conservatives confuse it all the time because their cultural production has political ends. Yeah. And that is like the kiss of death.
Yeah, of course.
And I see that with the halftime show as well. It's like we're doing we are a political organization organizing a cultural show. Again, the critique is limited only to the substance, great people, but ultimately you're ghettoizing, you're limiting, and you're creating a very low ceiling. If that's how you approach the culture.
All right, I got to respond to a couple things here. So one is that conservatives should be spending less time, resources on culture, more time, resources on the things they can win. In this case, in the domain of sort of explicit, well-defined politics, electoral contests, and such. I think it's and because we can only lose trying to participate or compete at this scale with the left in culture. I actually partly agree, but the problem is you're wrong that it's a categorical inevitability that we will fail in culture. We will right now probably end up failing at this top layer of visible culture that you see in places like the Super Bowl. Okay, what conservatives fail to understand is, and this is what we were talking about with all this infrastructure, what you see at the Super Bowl is built on top of this massive foundation of efforts, money, resources, talent cultivation, talent identification, the grind from this massive filter that happens when you go from the stage of like nonprofit, this is community theater people, this is the person who sings at the a cappella group at their college, and then how that then filters into the commercial level where now the sort of demands and discipline of capital and capitalism and commercialization then impose certain constraints around that and actually end up usually producing better stuff. And then that filters further up, and then you get to this like super part of it, like the superstructure that you see at the Super Bowl. Conservatives want to just start there. Okay, they want to just start at the top. And the actually answer is don't start at the top. You got to start down here. We got to start building out like very modest base to bring these people up through this filtering mechanism, through the soil, until you actually see the fruits of that way later, okay, down the road. That is like a decades-long project. And this is like poetry journals. I mean, it's stuff that wouldn't even cross the radar of most conservative donors, okay? Little musical theater things. We need writing programs and writing workshops, and we just need a place to cultivate this latent talent, because I disagree with you. It is there. It's very green. It hasn't had the opportunity to get this sort of polish and structure that comes from institutions, comes from professionalism. We're surrounded by, and I'm one of these people, what I call like rejects and dropouts. Okay, we were either like rejected by mainstream people or we dropped out of it. We felt that even if we could do it, even if we could like bite our tongue and go along with the whatever the talking points were and sort of nod our heads at these liberal pieties, we just couldn't do it anymore or didn't want to. And so you drop out and you try to find something else. And that comes with a certain kind of personality type.
Yep.
It's usually people who are green. They don't sort of have, and they're disagreeable often and sort of difficult to work with. All this is true, but that does not mean they're not talented. Okay, so we need to find a place to cultivate that talent. We can do so. And like, there was this thing online. I don't know if you saw this. The X had this contest to create a short film. And this guy, Fraser Payne, who's a mutual of mine, made this incredible little short film, clearly better, got orders of magnitude more impressions than the people who actually won, which was just BS, AI, like corporate slop.
Junk, yeah.
It was terrible. It was terrible. And it's like, all right, what do we do with this guy? Okay? Where do we find a place for this guy to cultivate his talent? Who's going to give this guy money? Who's going to give this guy an opportunity to make his feature-length film? And not because it's a right-wing film. He just happens to share a certain disposition, a set of beliefs, and is not afraid of articulating that publicly. That's all that matters here. He's a like-minded person. He's an ally. He's a friend in the political sense. And therefore, we want to help him cultivate that talent because the left can sniff out that he's on our side and will exile him from their cultivation pipelines. Okay, so that's what the right needs to concentrate on. And then the second thing I want to say is this. I've been watching the Winter Olympics, and NBC did this great initial setup where they were talking about the Duomo in Milan, okay, this beautiful cathedral. And the Duomo, it's all hand chiseled. It took 600 years to build in every little detail. And it starts as like blocks of stone 600 years ago. And then they show like a young kind of like skier, and it's like a kid who's like a Olympic hopeful. And it's like you have to take these steps, just step by step by step, and incrementally you're just building and building and building this thing. And when you start, you just have these like blocks of stone. And it's going to take 600 years. Or if you're like, you want to be an Olympic athlete, when you first imagine that as a possibility, it is impossible. It's statistically like impossible. And the only way to produce the thing is to just be willing to take these incremental steps, okay? And every moment there's an opportunity to try something new, to discover some new possibility for creating the larger project, you have to take it. And many of these things will result in failure, okay, and disappointment, and you won't get the views, and like you will look weak, or it'll look cringe or bad in relationship to whatever the thing is you're competing against. You have to be willing to take those chances. And I think part of the problem on the right is nobody wants to take the chance because the likelihood is you're going to fail. And so we see like the Kid Rock thing and we go, oh, we kind of cringe. It's Kid Rock. But I think that's just like the totally wrong attitude. We have to like celebrate this as an attempt to try something, as an attempt to push forward in the right direction. Maybe it doesn't work out, but it's okay. It's okay. We gotta like push into the dark. So, okay, we're building the Duomo here.
So I think in that sense, I would totally agree. Experimentation is important. Risk taking is important. Some creativity is important. Trying something and then improving on it over time is the only way forward. But I think we also have to be honest and self-critical, and that becomes sometimes a problem because we have our own little world. Conservative media, conservative political bubble, conservative culture. And it's very easy to fall for your own hype. Yeah. And so I think more than anything, like whatever, Kid Rock did a halftime show, great. At the end of the day, cool. Some people liked it. People watched it. It's like completely fine. But I think what really rubbed me the wrong way was that conservatives were buying into their own propaganda and their own kind of declaration of great victory. That was just like, hey, this is a bad habit of mine to get into, and we should be honest about where we stand. And even if it was going to require failure, I mean, I failed some of my creative enterprises, other enterprises, and failure can be, I think, the greatest teacher. I really do believe that. But you first have to admit, like, what the score is and see things and perceive things clearly. And even some of the more painful lessons, I think you have to absorb. And I just see this ongoing kind of problem, and I've seen it increase over time. On the right, sometimes, we buy into our own echo chamber. We're so deeply nested in it that we've created a psychology that is totally dependent on it. And that has edged into some kind of very self-destructive territory. And so I guess just want to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable and always perceiving our own efforts with honesty and not trading, reality away for fantasy.
All right. Fair enough. Now that we've gone through this whole sort of discourse here, can I give you my my sort of hot take? Okay, this is my sort of contrarian take on the Bad Bunny performance. I haven't heard anyone articulate this yet. That it was actually like a subversive, sort of like right wing, Maga Trumpian performance. And the argument here is that all that's happening from a foreign policy perspective, and like the Don Roe doctrine. And given the context of the Super Bowl as this expression, symbolic expression of like American sort of martial might and will, that this the Bad Bunny performance was a demonstration of like our imperial grandeur, and we're like subsuming all of the South American Spanish speaking peoples like into our imperial hegemony with this Super Bowl. Okay, that this was a sop to our new subjects, our new South American subjects, and in return for our imperial majesty over them, they get a piece of our bread and circuses. Okay, is there any merit to this?
Yeah, I like that, and so my own kind of the textual analysis of the Bad Bunny halftime show. It's similar, right? We're in this weird space where a lot of times the very far right kind of analysis and the very far left analysis are the same thing. And actually the mainstream narrative about what the halftime show is like completely wrong. So I saw I don't know, NBC, ABC, CBS, one of the kind of networks was says, the Bad Bunny performance was about kind of Latino values, the strength of marriage and families, and the exciting and colorful daily life of Puerto Ricans who are in American are just as American as you and me. They're citizens. They're a territory of the United States.
Yeah.
But again, I think you actually might be onto something. There is a very interesting, very far left, very far right, and I looked at it as a post-colonial ideological statement. So you open up with, and these are actual human beings that come out and they're dressed as sugar canes, right?
Yeah.
So the sugar canes are out there. There's the poor peasants, chopping away by hand with their machetes. And then you get, dressed in all white, you get Bad Bunny, right? And Bad Bunny represents this tension between the overseer. At one point you see him standing on a vintage, Ford F-150 truck, overseeing the darker skinned and more darkly dressed peasants who are, kind of have this grinding sexuality below. And for me, it's like, wow, he's representing purity, but he's also representing this machismo. He's the overseer of this sugar plantation. And then you have the critique of U.S. infrastructure policy, because you have guys trying to repair the electrical wires because the grid of Puerto Rico is failing. You have the poor, kind of third world food stands. You have there's an actual moment where they flash EBT accepted here. So they're recipients of American welfare. And then you see people grinding, like simulating sexual displays. And you're like, this is like either a post-colonial critique of American gringo imperialism on Puerto Rico, or this is like the most right-wing racialist implicit critique of kind of Latin kind of Latin unbridled sexuality and the rise of the pure white caudillo in Bad Bunny, who is overseeing the plantation. And it's like, so for me, I'm watching it like there is a lot going on here, and maybe this doubles with your kind of neo-imperialist take. I don't know. Yeah.
Let the record show that was Chris Rufo speaking, okay, and not me. So yes, I mean, yes.
You didn't see this?
Yes.
Am I wrong? Yeah, am I wrong?
No, I mean, yeah, and again, and like the fact that this is taking place within the context of what amounts to our sort of annual, what remains of any kind of civic secular tradition that we have left. Okay, this is our civil religion, and this may be actually like the last manifestation of a monoculture period, which is why the Super Bowl takes on all of this added sort of heft and importance. This is the last thing we have, okay? And so yes, all of that happening within that context, I think, supports the latter view. I think that's more maybe what is happening, but you know, that could be a stretch as well.
Which latter view? What do you mean?
That this
Elaborate.
Rather than postcolonial, this is neocolonial. Okay, let's call it. Let me just, I found this, a description of the halftime performance before we move on to the next subject from 1974. Okay, and this was a guy who did like the first sort of like critical media analysis of the Super Bowl as this sort of larger, sort of symbolic performance. And this is what the halftime was. Halftime, this is 1974 Super Bowl VIII. Halftime entertainment is replete with martial music, precision drills, uniforms, and massive formations. Super Bowl VIII featured the University of Texas Marching Band with Miss Texas playing a hoedown-style fiddle. They were followed by a three-ring circus with Miss Canada as ring mistress. The telecast then cut to the American Express, quote, playbook ad, followed by the live on-field finals of the Ford punt and pass competition for boys from across the country. That sounds so wholesome and wonderful. Okay.
It does, but it's so cool because I think that imagery is actually reproduced in the iconic Bad Bunny scene that I've seen, replicated over and over, but never fully analyzed. The last part of it is Bad Bunny says, "God bless America," the only English he speaks in the program, and then he lists all of the independent Latin American nations. And then you see from a low camera angle that is tracking backwards, you see Bad Bunny leading kind of men and women dressed in Panama hats and some straw hats, holding the national flags behind, kind of behind or at least parallel to the American flag. And then as he's listing them, and they're playing percussion instruments, and almost the music almost feels martial. And so if you look at that from, again, the post-colonial, neocolonial point of view, you could interpret that as either this is a kind of a threat of mass immigration against the United States. These, foreign nationals are marching and declaring their kind of ownership over the Americas as a whole. Or as you're suggesting, you could say, well, no, it's actually the flip side of that. You're saying, no, these are like part of this larger American mosaic. And because you see at the top of the screen a Levi's billboard with the most kind of Orwell-esque slogan, it says, "The only thing more powerful than hate is love." Levi's, and then American fireworks, in the stadium.
Yeah.
It's like, no. We're giving them this performance, but it's constrained by the broader economic and political dominance. But to me, it was like, look, aesthetically, it fails for me for precisely that reason. They were trying to shoehorn in the only thing more powerful than hate is love, like the most banal, dystopian, left-wing liberal statement imaginable, with something else that's happening under the surface. And so, to me, it's like conservatives actually should be thinking about this stuff. Yeah. And I think the other problem that I felt was, instead of thinking about this and speaking about this and debating about it, like you're looking up this very interesting paper, conservatives are just like, I don't like it. It wasn't in English. I hate the NFL. but I'm still going to tune in. And to me, that is the tension that I feel, and creates, I think, a long-term liability for our side.
Half of you listening right now aren't subscribed to the Rufo and Lomez show. Please do so now. Hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, sign up now so you don't miss any of our content. Chris, like, is it the case that, and
I know
maybe
you
this is
agree
just
with me.
a
That's
fact
the thing.
of conditioning. No, that the right has a broad sort of category of different ideas, of course, but broadly speaking, enjoys feeling aggrieved in this way. Like they kind of, they take some satisfaction in it, or it's just the comfortable posture. And like, and again, you know, let's leave the Kid Rock thing out of it and the TPUSA thing out of it for a second, because the question is like, what is the appropriate response? Okay, the Super Bowl and the NFL. And let's not, you know, we can kind of rewrite, as the left used to do, you know, they would problematize texts and then you rewrite their meanings to serve your own sort of sociological, you know, psychological and political purposes. There's some value in that. And I think it's good for us to sit here and kind of like rewrite the meaning of some of these texts, quote unquote, as they would call it. But what is the right's appropriate response to this? I mean, the impotent whinging that is like so often the predominant posture, yeah, it feels kind of weak and it's lame, but isn't that kind of what we're doing? Isn't that what the right likes to do? Doesn't the right just like to feel aggrieved? Is there some alternative in which the right, broadly speaking again, can claim some kind of ownership or agency in this process of producing a monocultural project in coordination with the NFL? I mean, is it even possible?
Maybe not in the near term, but I think the thing that the right can do is not take the bait, right?
Yeah.
And then also declare victory when victory should be declared. The actual victory in the Super Bowl, looking at it as far as media, there were zero woke advertising, with the possible exception of the anti-Semitism ad, which we can, you know, maybe leave to the side. But you know, woke has basically disappeared. I think that advertisers did not want to offend conservatives. Conservatives got a couple bones thrown to them in the Bad Bunny performance, let's say. And then at a certain point, you just have to say, look, this is what it is. The Super Bowl is America's advertising machine. It's a pop culture machine. It's a youth audience acquisition machine. It's not going to be a Bible show. It's not going to be the Texas, rodeo performance. It's not going to have that wholesome 1950s culture, because that's not our culture anymore. And it really doesn't serve us to be offended. And in fact, I think conservatives would do much better to say, let's look at this. Let's take a fair look at, let's not automatically feel outraged or aggrieved or threatened. But in fact, let's engage with the culture as it is, recognizing that, you know, Bad Bunny, for better or for worse, whatever your position is, that is where the culture is. And so can we engage with the culture with a sense of agency over our own emotions? And that to me is real power, to say, I engage with the culture as it is, without reacting emotionally, without letting the television dominate my own psychology. You know, I think conservatives are, frankly, used to being dominated by the television. The television programs the conservative boomer brain, and then they're kind of having an emotional reaction to it. And that's just like, I'm done with that. We have to get out of that. You know, you are stronger than your television. That's something that we should learn, you know, from the novels of Thomas Pynchon, from the social criticisms of the past 50 years, from Christopher Lasch, whatever it is. Like, we should steel ourselves so that we do not, wet the bed every time the television turns on.
Okay, now I agree. Acting out emotionally does no good and makes you look weak. But I'll note that the left is very good at this kind of passive aggressive provocation. So you get these periods of just like intense antagonism and hostility to the right. Okay. This was very common during the BLM era, for example, and I don't have to go through the whole litany of sort of political slogans and sort of anti-white racism that was just rife. It was everywhere and dominated all of our institutions. Okay, so we'll just accept that as it was. And then the right has a backlash, right? Because this is crazy. And they become incensed, rightfully incensed, okay, at this betrayal and kind of violation of the unspoken sort of political compact between left and right. We sort of agreed to arbitrate and negotiate our differences on these terms, and you guys have completely abandoned those terms, violated those terms, and we're angry about it, and we want to take this action, and then maybe the right wins some elections, or there's this intermediate culture turn, and the left immediately pivots to this kind of sentimental coming together, mutual understanding tone. Hey, this is a time for us all just to, hold hands with each other and let bygones be bygones and understand that we're just all the same and we're going to live in this country together and we're all just neighbors and, hate has no place here, okay? This anger, this political anger that you're expressing through, Trump and this resentment and this anger over immigrants, well, let's just forget that we let in 10 million illegals, okay, over the last. Let's just forget that we completely abandoned our responsibilities to steward this country in any kind of reasonable, responsible way, that we had as our fundamental and even explicit project a kind of demographic replacement, that we wanted to identify white people, white men, white Christian straight men, okay, as like the cause of all our social ills, and that we were going to redistribute resources around this new accepted reality of who the villains were in our society. Okay, just let's forget all that. Okay, we're just going to be friends now, and we're just going to love. We're going to have love. No more hate. And then the moment conservatives are always like a step behind. Okay, they're still in the like the incensed emotional mode of like being angry at what happened, and then. You also they're behind emotionally, but they're also behind politically, because now we have to go redress all of the things that happened previously. And by the way, the political redress and reconstruction of that sort of stable equilibrium we had requires ongoing action, and it's kind of messy and difficult and is like necessarily antagonistic. Okay, and so you're put in this kind of impossible sort of situation. You cannot. Now, it's incumbent on conservatives to maintain emotional discipline.
Yes.
And we're surrounded by emotionally incontinent people, okay?
Yes.
They're everywhere, and they just cannot keep their emotions in control, and they cannot respond sort of soberly and effectively. They get baited, like you said, by this emotional reaction. But at the same time, this kind of flip, this normative flip that liberals like to take in the moments of their sort of
smart.
These previous moments of cultural subordination, okay, we're just all getting along, is totally cynical. Okay, yeah. It's totally cynical. It's totally unfair, okay, to use a term, but it's meant to defang any kind of meaningful response that conservatives might take in response to what previously happened. Okay, this is all just an explanation of how these cultural moods tend to be constructed in such a way as to serve precisely the interests of, the prevailing sort of liberal superstructure here.
And so if you were to take, I think that's such a smart point. And if you were to take the Bad Bunny performance, assuming as a prior, I don't believe this, but just for sake of argument, assuming as a prior that this was a left-wing plot to damage conservatives, to solidify this kind of the Biden era illegal migration wave, your take would be spot on, because they had an actual, heterosexual wedding ceremony during the performance. So they had these top line images that are, family friendly, conservative, but they have that other kind of message, which was kind of demographic, kind of mass demographic change. You could analyze it in that way, with the left wing slogan, that perfectly passive aggressive slogan: the only thing more powerful than hate is love. And he's like, well, wait a minute, who's hating here? And then you realize, well, actually, that is perfect bait, because conservatives, the liberal can then hide. They could say, what? This is Bad Bunny. This is the number one streaming artist. There's a wedding. This is family values. This is great. But conservatives get worked up into such a frenzy that then they could be, accused of hate. And I think you're right. But again, what is the solution to that? The solution to that is emotional control over ourselves, refusal to take the bait, and then analysis to actually break it down in a way where it loses its power, it loses its kind of subtle ability to manipulate. And then conservatives can, with clear eyes, say, all right, well, how do we think about this? What do we do about this? What are the wins? What are the losses? What does the balance sheet look like? And so in that regard, I think conservatives, again, did not rise to the task, and we're in precisely the way you've described. Fell for the bait yet again.
Okay, maybe sort of, and
except for us, we didn't fall. We didn't take the bait.
I mean, a little bit. I mean, because truthfully, our response is it's not concrete. Because the thing I want to say about this is something like you have to ruthlessly rip any kind of power and agency away from these people over over some kind of medium to long term timeline. The idea that the people who are responsible and these institutions responsible for kind of stewarding the culture can somehow be rehabilitated or will learn the lessons of this excess and permanently back off the kind of overt hostility that they once showed towards conservatives, and now they're just going to be fine with middle class nuclear family values or something. I mean, I think it's totally absurd and completely naive. And so the question then is, how do you systematically, and this goes back to, this is the underlying question, and I don't know that anyone has a good answer for it. And again, we're going to have to try a lot of different ways. We need to systematically just strip these people of power. We need to somehow undo these networks of institutional control. We need to be able to extract concessions, and we need to be able to punish people who violate this new equilibrium we're trying to create. I mean, we're not going to have time to get into this. There's the guy, Gene Wu, who is the congressman. Let's save this. Okay, let's save this for the next. There's too much to talk about there. We're already 55 minutes in. But let's just suffice to say that as a part of this larger strategy, we need to be thinking more cynically Machiavellian-y, that's probably not a word, but fine, about power, about how we wrest power, about how we take permanent control. And we're trying, but this is a long and difficult and complicated thing to do.
I love that, and I would say as a closing thought, at least on my end, which is the Super Bowl is such a great symbol or a great nexus of institutions through which to ask that question.
Yeah.
Because the Super Bowl is sports, but the Super Bowl is also the largest mainstream entertainment object in the United States. And the Super Bowl is also the largest single vehicle for corporate advertising.
Yep.
And so you get business, culture, entertainment, money, and then you have it all condensed into a big American symbol with broad national buy-in. And so it's a perfect symbol to start saying, all right, well, how do you influence the direction of how the Super Bowl goes?
Yep.
And in one level, it's trivial. It's like, oh, who cares? These are advertisements. It's a bad concert. It's all like lip syncing and spectacle. But in another sense, I think conservatives need to accept that's what America is. The Super Bowl is America. And to the extent that we're losing the cultural production of the Super Bowl is not necessarily, sometimes it's excess, it's left-wing overreach. But I think we should take as a possibility that no, in fact, that is where America is now.
Yep.
And I think that is like such an interesting question to start thinking about. And maybe by the time we get to the next Super Bowl, we'll have a good answer. But to me, it really is ending on a question because, as you said, we're not going to figure it out. In the near
and
term.
it is really worth thinking about. I mean, it's also this kind of perfect public-private split. I mean, it is in some sense a private institution, but it's also not. I mean, it depends on sort of protection from monopolies, and all of these stadiums, not all of them, a lot of these stadiums are dependent on public financing. It's just obviously the case that these teams and what they represent are part of a larger sort of public civic infrastructure. So this is a public matter. It is a political matter. It's naive to say that it's not a political matter. It absolutely is. And by the way, the Super Bowl in the NFL and football in general is our home turf. This should be an easy win for the right. I mean, football is just fundamentally a kind of right-wing enterprise, and there are all sorts of reasons for that. At the most superficial level, it is a right-wing conservative fan base, more so than any of the other major sports. And so there are deeper sort of cultural reasons why it's right-wing, but that's the superficial reason. And so we should be able to win this. And it's, part of the problem too, and this is no knock on the TPUSA people at all. Again, I am very encouraged that they did something and pulled it off, successfully. We can quibble about its meaning and its significance ultimately, but it was, as a proof of concept, it's something. And it's actually bigger than I think you're giving it credit for. It's more meaningful maybe. But nonetheless, it's like something gets planned a month in advance, okay? It's like, how do we scramble at the last minute to have some kind of answer to what, the Super Bowl has been planning a year or more ahead of time. So we should be thinking about this like right now. We should be thinking about Super Bowl 2027 like 2 years ago. It's not too late, but yeah, this requires long-term planning and much deeper thinking than I think what we're usually used to.
Yeah, and it was great. I'm glad we had some productive disagreement. I think, look, these are great conversations to have, and we're having them right now, which is good. And I hope that others, follow suit, and we can have, a kind of intelligent look at these questions. So, awesome, great to talk, and we'll be back in a couple days.
All right, see you, Chris.